Hello, and welcome back to our series, Homage to Africa on the Arts of Africa. I'm Rafael Chacón, Director of the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, and it's a pleasure to take you on this amazing journey, 6 lectures in which we discuss the vibrant arts of Africa, the African continent. And of course, we're only doing pieces, parts of the continent. But the idea here is to introduce you to these very, very rich traditions from across the continent, and also to entice you to visit our collections at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, particularly the exhibition Homage to Africa, which runs until May 8th, 2021. And if you can't visit us live, please feel free to join us virtually on our virtual tours. At the end of the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see a link to that site. So today I have the pleasure of discussing the Yoruba people of Nigeria and their fabulous arts. And we've talked about Nigeria before. In the last time we met, we looked at the ancient kingdom of Ile-Ife and the Benin Kingdom, and we talked about the importance of this region of Africa, the easternmost part of the Guinea coast. And I'd like to continue that discussion today by talking about the Yoruba, and especially as the Yoruba continue to be a vibrant force in today's world. So bear with me as I share my screen, and we will get started with our PowerPoint. So again, this is the 5th lecture in a 6-part series. So the region that we're looking at is, again, the easternmost part of the Guinea coast and in the country of Nigeria, but it's in the southwestern part of Nigeria where we're going to focus today. And that is colloquially known as Yoruba land. That is where one of the largest groups in modern Nigeria and the neighboring country of Benin live. The Yoruba are one of the most populous groups in Nigeria. They're about almost 25% of the population. They speak their own language, Ede Yoruba, and they have been here for a long, long time. Anthropologists and particularly oral historians can tell us that this is a very, very ancient language and that they've been in this part of Africa for millennia. And of course, we discussed the last time we met the ancient kingdom of Ife, which emerged under a divine king or an Oba, known as the Oni of Ife, from about 1100 to 1700. And that ancient empire was followed by the Oyo Empire that succeeded it from 1700 to about 1900 into the modern age. And that was ruled by the Alafin of Oyo. The Alafin was, again, a descendant of divine kings. And of course, we discussed the last time we met the Benin Empire in its capital city of Benin City, which was an equally powerful state between the year 1300 and 1850. And it was ruled by the Oba, or the divine king of Benin. And again, these kings of Benin City, or the Benin Kingdom, or the Oyo Empire, both derive from the ancient kingdom of Ile-Ife. 2 maps showing you the region that we're looking at. So this is the country on the left. You see the modern boundaries of modern Nigeria and the neighboring state of Benin to the west, much smaller country. But as you can see on the map on the right, that yellow region there represents Yoruba land, and it extends into large parts of modern-day Benin, but most of it is concentrated in southwestern Nigeria. And here is another map that shows us the diversity of ethno-linguistic groups that surround the Yoruba in modern-day Nigeria and Benin. As you can see, they have many, many neighbors. The Igbo, for example, to the east, the Edo also to the east, etc. These are important groups in their own right. But why do we study the Yoruba? And there's a reason for singling them out. And it's not just because they have remarkable arts. They have a distinct concept called Ona, which is indeed art. Art that has been specialized under royal patronage since at least the 10th century. So we're looking at a long, continuous history of art making in this part of the continent. But the other reason why we should know the Yoruba is because they're important in the Americas. They're important in the rest of the world. as a result of the slave trade and the diaspora, the Yoruba diffused their religion to the Americas, and they intertwined it with Roman Catholicism in what is historically one of the most elaborate, extensive, deepest, and interesting examples of religious syncretism. That is the blending of two radically different religious traditions, and we'll talk more about that later in this conversation. So this is a map of the ancient kingdom of Oyo, well, actually the modern kingdom of Oyo from about 1700 to 1900. And it really is the kingdom upon which the Yoruba rest their identity today. This was an important kingdom in modern times. And at the heart of that kingdom was, of course, this concept of divine monarchy. That is, that you had kings that were descendants of the primordial gods or the primordial beings who established, created mankind or created humanity. But alongside these divine kings, who were in fact political rulers as well as spiritual beings, there were also democratic councils, and these have been documented among the Yoruba. The city-states were controlled by councils that were made up of leaders of royal, noble descent, and these were known as the Oloyes. And they ruled through a series of guilds and sometimes cults, sometimes secret cults. In 1853, Frederick Forbes, a British commander, recorded that the town of Abeokuta had, quote, 4 presidents, 840 principal rulers or House of Lords, 2,800 secondary chiefs or House of Commons, and of course he's equating these to the British tradition. This town also had 140 principal military leaders and 280 secondary military leaders. He called this the most extraordinary republic in the world. So in addition to this idea, this long aristocratic or monarchical tradition of divine kings, the Yoruba also had a strong democratic tradition as well. And what I'm showing you here in these two photographs from the early 20th century are Yoruba kings arriving at the coronation of a British monarch in 1937. So the Yoruba, of course, were acknowledged to be royals. Their royal traditions were respected by the empires of the Western world, and so they took their rightful place in that sphere in the 20th century. The Alafin, or the ruler of the Yoruba, is a divine being, a sacred being. So much so that the regalia, everything he wears, is symbolic and imbued with a great deal of power and majesty. Therefore, the arts, a great deal of attention has been showered upon the regalia worn by the Alafin, or the ruler of the state. Here, for example, are these crowns. These are beaded crowns worn by the Alafin, and these crowns are called ade. They are these sacred crowns that protect the head that contains the soul of this divine being. The crowns are very elaborate. They're typically conical and often with a lot of imagery, metaphoric imagery of birds and animals that tell of the power and the role that the king plays in the society. Often topped with a bird, the sacred bird that, of course, cleanses the empire by picking the bugs off the state. And then often you'll see faces, or the faces of deities, the visage of the orishas, the gods of the pantheon, the Yoruba pantheon. And the Yoruba have a very, very extensive set of deities, as many as 90 beings, sacred beings. And these, of course, appear on crowns like this to protect the sacred being of the divine monarch. Notice, for example, that the king also has strands of beads that cover his face, because it's thought to be not just bad luck, but damning to actually peer into the face of the divine Alafin. Here's another beautiful crown with images of animals to protect the Ade, the head of the Yoruba king. One orisha that often appears on these crowns is Eshu. And Eshu is the keeper of portals, thresholds, doorways. He is in some ways like a Janus figure in the ancient Greek world, a figure who looks in not just two directions, but in four directions to guard the majesty and the status and the life of the divine monarch. And there we see that central face, the masket, if you will, of Eshu on this beaded crown. Here's two other ades with variations. Some of them have flaps to protect the face and the head of the alafin. This is an interesting object, and this one is presently at in the exhibition Homage to Africa at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. And this work is a part of Molly Shepard's collection. And this is called a head shrine because it was in fact to protect the sacred head. This is an ile ori, to protect the head of an important individual. And again, the face that we see here, not just beaded on the cylinder, the cylindrical body of that vessel, is the face of Eshu. But we also see Eshu upside down on those four flaps. And of course, four is symbolic of the four cardinal directions. In other words, Eshu is protecting the most sacred part of the individual, the head, to whom this belonged. And here we see the other sides of this beautiful beaded shrine, and it shows us indeed that the individual, more than likely the individual who possessed it, was a hunter, and he is shown with a bow and arrow hunting large animals like the alligator that you see there on the right. There's an elephant on the other side of the shrine. So these objects covered in beautiful beadwork, cowrie shells, were symbolic, obviously symbolic, but also very practical because they performed a function in the religion of the Yoruba people. Here's another wonderful beaded object, and this one is in the Tony Hoyt collection, also on view at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. It's a spectacular image of the Oba, or the king, on horseback, surrounded by four of his attendants, maybe his bodyguards, if you will, military men. And this spectacular object, completely covered in beautiful beadwork, and very elaborate beadwork and expensive beadwork, reflects the majesty and the compositions of those bronze plaques that we saw among the Benin, the neighboring peoples of the Benin kingdom. So it's not unlikely that what you see here is a royal artist imitating a tradition that comes from the neighboring peoples of the Benin kingdom. Here are some more images of these kings wearing their full regalia. They're not just beautiful textiles, but they're beautiful crowns, oftentimes covering their faces. And I want to highlight this interesting image on the right that shows the king with two of his spouses. And then we see him seated below with someone in Western clothing, but there without his crown. So we see his actual face. Here's another image of a young Yoruba king on the left with all kinds of symbolic imagery on his clothing, as well as the ade that he's wearing on his head. He's also holding in his hand a fly whisk, which is a symbol of power, but also it's symbolic of the king swatting the flies, keeping the pests away from the kingdom itself. And some of those themes repeat in royal regalia, such as the crown that you see there on the right. Here's another crown, this one beaded almost entirely in cowrie shells. And of course, the cowrie shell is important because it was a form of currency, a very important trade item throughout the African continent. It was a symbol of wealth. Here's another image of a ruler enthroned. This photograph was taken in 1977, and it's an image of Airo Wayowe, the first one of the Yoruba kings, seated with his feet on a stool, holding a very important, impressive beaded staff. There are other objects, important objects to the court that often were beaded. For example, this is a beaded staff known as orisha oikoron. It's a kind of ritualized, a ritual sword. So it wasn't actually used in warfare, but perhaps it was used in spiritual warfare. And it has a cap and it has a cover. And it's an object that would have been venerated by the Yoruba court. But there are other kinds of shrines, not just the beaded things that I've shown you. There are, in fact, carved images of the kings in all their glory. And I'm going to show you a couple of works, a couple of examples of the exquisite carving that you see among the Yoruba people. And again, here are, for example, two of these royal shrines where you have these large heads, and on top of the large heads, you have an image of the equestrian or the king on horseback, sometimes with attendant figures like the small musician that you see there on the right. Important themes, the idea of the king being all powerful and one of the few people who could ride a horse in the society, much like in ancient Rome. There is among the Yoruba a very, very famous carver. He's sort of the Michelangelo, if you'll excuse the analogy, the Michelangelo of the Yoruba. And his name was Olowe of Ise. There are a number of his carvings, not just in museums in Nigeria, but also around the world. Olowe was a prolific artist and a very, very important named artist in the 20th century. And his sculptures indeed go back to the early part of the 20th century. The one that you see here is a house post, a veranda post from the town of Akure. And this was carved in the 1920s by Olowe of Ise. And we should unpack the imagery a little bit. Now remember, this is a functional object. It's a part of architecture. It was a house post. And the Yoruba had courtyards in their royal palaces. And again, as I read to you earlier, there were many, many palaces in the Yoruba world, because there were indeed many rulers. But these veranda posts were representations of the important kings of the Yoruba. And in this one, indeed, we see the theme that I just showed you, the equestrian image, so the king seated on horseback. But in this case, because it's an elongated vertical object, the base of it is in fact a group of women upholding the king on horseback. So you have this wonderful theme of the women, in fact, supporting the patriarch or the royal male being. These are wonderful photographs. They show us Olowe of Ise in the center with a couple of his carvings. One there, again, another equestrian image on the left, and then this wonderful image on the right of a young king with the queen mother standing behind him, literally behind the throne. And this gives you also a sense of the scale of these house posts, these veranda posts that Olowe was said to have carved from one palace to the next. These were carved out of wood, a solid piece of wood, and then were brightly painted by Olowe and his workshop. And it was an itinerant workshop. It moved throughout Yoruba land where he established his reputation. Here's another one. This one shows us it's an equestrian image of the king on horseback holding weapons in his hands. And as you can see, he is surrounded by much smaller diminutive figures, sometimes tucked in between the legs of the horse. And these are often wives, children, or attendants, musicians, etc. This exquisite version of the veranda post by Olowe of Ise is in the Art Institute of Chicago. And again, it shows a young king enthroned with his wives down below, a wife and a musician at his feet, and then the queen mother, the very regal, statuesque image of the Queen Mother standing behind him, holding the throne and literally holding up the house. Because again, this is a house post that supported the roof of a veranda or a porch in the royal palace. By the way, she is covered with signs of her her majesty and her beauty. The blue color that you see in her skin is reminiscent of the indigo dye, the most precious blue in this part of Africa. She has an elaborate coiffure. She has scarification marks on her face, all signs of beauty and status in Yoruba, in the Yoruba world. Here's another photograph, actually both very grainy older photographs showing these house posts as they would have been seen in the palaces of the Yoruba kings. And there's another image there on the left of Olowe of Ise, sort of in his late days. And some of the other kinds of objects that he created, for example, these are doors to the shrine of the king's head in the royal palace at Ikere. And the doors themselves are quite stunning in terms of the imagery that they have on there. Not only do they show us the royals and the familiar themes of the king on horseback or the king enthroned, but they also show us things like the colonial, the image on the right there, where we see a European being carried in a kind of hammock-like form by the Yoruba. Also, members of the court, servants of the king, military men, the elaborate retinue of the Yoruba kings. And here's a marvelous photograph showing us a Yoruba woman of higher status with her scarification marks on her face. These two objects that you see here are actually bowls, and they are divination bowls. And so what we have here is a carving that is quite elaborate because it has a basin and then a top. And often the top is elaborated with figures of animals or humans engaging in ceremony. And what these bowls were used for was divination. They contained the sacred materials used for divining by the Yoruba healers and the shamans. I'm going to show you a few of these. The one on the left is a commoner's version of a divination bowl with the theme of a Yoruba mother holding her child at her back. And then on the right, we have another Yoruba woman kneeling in front of the divination bowl. And this divination bowl is held up by smaller attendant figures. The one on the right tends to be a much more aristocratic object from a higher class context. And you can see it's actually a bit finer in terms of the carving and much more elaborate in terms of the imagery of the bowl itself. So these bowls are known as agare ife, and they are in fact divination bowls. There are also opon ifa, and the opon ifa are boards that are also used for divination. And so that central part that you see there carved out of the board is where the divination actually takes place by babalaos or priests. And there's often a circle, a ring of imagery surrounding that central part. And that imagery could refer to the orishas, the deities, or all kinds of forces, animal, spiritual, ancestral forces that guide the Yoruba world. Here, the board on the right, you can see 3 heads of Eshu, the god of the crossroads, on that board on the upper right. And here you see some photographs of babalaos actually throwing the kola nuts, which are used in divination on these boards. And again, 2 other boards, they're typically round, but you can often find them as square. And again, here you see Eshu. Eshu as this deity that opens up the doorways, in fact, his nickname is the opener of the way. Eshu is a kind of messenger god. He is usually heralded early on in a ceremony, acknowledged at the beginning and at the end of ceremonies. Especially the divination. And here you see a divination board with the kola nuts on it. There is another interesting phenomenon among the Yoruba, and that is the phenomenon of twinning. They have among the highest twinning rates in the world. 45 per 1,000 births are twins. There's a town in Nigeria, Igbora, that has an average of 150 twins per 1,000 births, making it the world's highest level of twinning on the planet. And the twins have a very special status to the Yoruba as a result. They are thought to, it's believed that they shared a soul. So twins are actually part of one being. And they have individual names. The first twin is known as the Tayewo, and this is the first one to taste the world. And the second one, Kahindi, is the child that came last gets the rights of the eldest. So there's obviously an attempt to bring parity to these twins. The Yoruba also have a high infant mortality rate. So one of the traditions that they have is to carve images of these twins. And these are known as Ere Ibeji twins. And what happens is that when inevitably a family loses a twin, that carved image contains the soul of or harbors the soul of the lost twin, and that twin is treated very much like a living being in the family. So the twins are fed, they're nurtured, they're put to bed at night, they're protected, they're decorated, they're treated as members of the family. And here you see a house shrine with many of their Ere Ibeji twins, and a couple of Yoruba holding their twins in their hands. It's a lovely tradition, and here you see that there, of course, given the numbers of twins in the society, there are thousands, perhaps millions of these carvings of the Yoruba twins. There's sometimes fraternal twins, and sometimes they're identical twins. Here are some versions of those, again, fraternal and identical twins. And as you can see, they often carry beaded necklaces, elekes as they're known, jewelry of all sorts, and sometimes clothing, small little vestments that are added to these figures. There are a number of Ere Ibeji in the Tony Hoyt collection on view at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture today. There's another tradition among the Yoruba, and like many of the Ghanaian, the groups, the peoples of the Ghanaian coast, the Yoruba have a very, very rich masquerade. And I'm just going to show you some evidence of this masquerade. This is a figure known as an egungun. And an egungun is a wild and very, very interesting character. This figure emerges at annual festivals covered in reams of very elaborate and beautiful fabrics. The figure doesn't really have a body per se. In fact, to see it here on the right is really not the way one should see these. One should see them in movement, dynamic movement, like you see there on the left. Here's another image of an egungun in movement, where where really you can't tell where the head is or where the torso is or where the body is. It's really this kind of mass of flowing fabric and color. One of the more interesting masquerade figures in all of Western Africa. And here are some images of egungun from the Yoruba land. There's also another society known as the Gelede, and sometimes, these are actually carved images of egungun. So sometimes they do possess heads of ancestral spirits like the ones that you see here. But then there's another tradition known as the Gelede, and as you can see, that tradition has also extended to depictions of Westerners in a kind of satiric fashion. So these are masks showing us Westerners. So the mask that I want to show you now is known as a gelede, and these are worn by Yoruba men in a masquerade, and this one is associated with an agricultural ceremony that takes place between March and May. The gelede are known affectionately as the mothers, and so even though these are worn by men, they're actually men impersonating the mothers, the important mothers of the Yoruba society. They represent the spiritual life force of Ashe, but they can also possess the power to destroy. So women, of course, are creative creatures given their procreative powers, but they also have a destructive power, and that is known as Aye. And so these women, Westerners sometimes called them witches, because if they were angered, they were believed to be able to destroy individuals or sometimes entire communities with their Aye, their destructive power. So the importance of the gelede masquerade was to celebrate, to honor, in some cases to pamper or placate these mothers, so that they would use their life force, their positive ashe in life, rather than the destructive aye powers. And here you see the gelede mask and costume and the gelede performances in the masquerade. And the masks are also quite interesting and quite elaborate. They're worn atop the head of the wearer, and they usually have a beautiful face of a female, and sometimes additional creatures like the birds that you see here, a theme that we saw on the ade, or the crowns of the Olofin, the king. They can be very simple in design, like the one that you see there on the right, or quite elaborate. This one has a whole scene of figures holding staffs, surrounded by architectural elements atop her head. Here, two other ones that are quite elaborate, where you have where the figure has been carved out of a solid block of wood, creating almost a lattice of intertwined figures. This is the same figure seen from above. And here's another one, a slightly more crude version of this idea. This one, you can see a large snake, a brightly colored snake, on the very top of this gelede mask. This one is actually very interesting because the gelede looks like a real person with a quite beautiful headdress, braided hair atop. But then this one has the twin axes of the Orisha Shango. And I want to introduce you to this Orisha because it's one of the more important figures in the pantheon of the Yoruba religion. Shango is a deity identified with lightning, is a deity identified with metalsmiths among the Yoruba. And of course, they have metallurgy, the Yoruba have metallurgy, all forms of metallurgy. And so the metalsmiths are very important characters. They're a kind of shamanic figure in the society because they transform the elements. They melt, they use air, wind, fire, water to transform one element into something else. And so Shango is an Orisha identified with the power of lightning and with the class of metalsmiths in the society. And the symbol for Shango is this double-headed axe. And there you see, in fact, a shrine to Shango on the lower left with a figure with the twin axe on its head. This is another shrine to Shango there on the right. And here you see a babalao, or a priest to Shango, on the left, holding a sacred two-bladed staff dedicated to Shango. And then on the right, we have the carved head of one of these staffs with a representation of Shango and the twin-headed axe on the top. Shango appears much like Eshu or any of the other great deities of the pantheon, appears in all kinds of different art forms, often as represented as a female figure, but typically with this twin axe shape or form somewhere in the sculpture. Here's a couple of staffs, again, with the image of Shango as a kneeling figure and the axe atop her head. I mentioned that the Yoruba extended their religion to the New World, or the Americas. And so I'm showing you an image on the left, which is a modern card, holy card of Shango as an African Orisha, as a Yoruba Orisha. But the image on the right is also an image of Shango. This is the Christian saint, Saint Barbara. And I was born in Cuba, raised in a Cuban family, a Roman Catholic family. And I remember, though, as a child, hearing my aunts, whenever there was lightning outside, saying a phrase, "Ay Shango, protégenos." Oh, Shango, protect us. My very Catholic aunts were actually praying to Shango, the Yoruba god of lightning, or the Yoruba Orisha of lightning. What had happened in Cuba and in many parts of the Americas where Yoruba slaves brought their religion with them was this remarkable syncretism between their pantheon of deities or forces and the Christian saints. Saint Barbara was apparently a young Roman woman who was martyred by being put in a tower, hence the crown in the shape of a crenellated fortification on the Christian saint, on the Virgin saint, and she was eventually, well, she was placed in this tower by a Roman because she wouldn't put out sexual favors, because she wouldn't give up her Christian faith. So she died, apparently died a virgin, was eventually beheaded, hence the sword. So her Christian symbols are a chalice, a sword, and a tower. And that's typically what we see the attributes associated with Saint Barbara. Those attributes were merged with the double-headed axe of Shango and the chalice, the metal smithing of the West African, the Yoruba deity. They have become one saint in the religion of Santeria in Cuba, or voodoo in Haiti, or candomblé in Brazil. Again, these modern religions are a mixture of Roman Catholicism with all of its elaborate iconography and iconology related to the Christian saints, merged with the rich Yoruba traditions. And I'll end by showing you a kind of manifestation of that in the Americas. These are shrines to Shango, Saint Barbara, in Latin America. So the colors that we see here, the bright red, the golds, these are the colors of Shango. Both the African Orisha, the Yoruba Orisha, and the Christian saint, Saint Barbara. So here in this, in the altar that you see there in front of you, you have gifts of food and tobacco and money, and certainly water, chalices of water, but also candles and lots of beads, because every Yoruba Orisha has an eleke, that is a strand of beads that represent the colors and the numbers, the sacred numbers identified with these saints. The saints or the orishas are usually acknowledged at the beginning of the year. The priests will tell us which gods will rule for that year, which deities need special attention in that year, what kind of fortune we can expect when these deities, in fact, are acknowledged and celebrated during the course of the year. It's a very complicated, a very, very rich religion, which is celebrated by millions of people across the Americas, certainly in Latin America, but also in North America as well. So, and here's another shrine to Saint Barbara, or Shango, the Yoruba deity, or Orisha. So thank you very much for coming along with me today. If you've liked this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to take the virtual tour of Homage to Africa, our exhibition at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. So visit us at our webpage. And I hope to see you the next time when we finish up our Homage to Africa tour. Thank you and have a great day.